Welcome to the webinar today. Thank you for attending. My name is Mike Weaver, and I'm one of the product owners here at Quadratech. I oversee our email migration and PST elimination products. Before joining, I came from industry as an exchange SME. In that role, I ran successful PST elimination projects, as well as had a focus on merger, acquisition, and divestitures. But today, I'm really excited to be joined by Dom Hoffling, and he is a Microsoft MVP working for At Work. Dom, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me today, Mike, and hi everyone. My name is Dominic Hoffling, and I'm working as a principal consultant in the Microsoft 365 area. I'm currently involved in many large and complex migration projects with lots of data, lots of complex networks, and also mergers and acquisitions. Back over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Dom. And Dom's also the author of a really good ebook that we have here at Quadratech on PSTs, which is today's topic. So certainly that'll be a material that we'll distribute after this. But with that, before we get started, let me just go through the brief webinar housekeeping to ensure good quality audio experience for everybody. All lines are currently muted and they are going to stay muted throughout the webinar. However, if you do have questions, we would like to address them at the end, but please submit them as we go. In the right-hand toolbar, you'll see the questions feature. We have a few members of the Quadratech team there to help facilitate those. And at the end, Dom and I will try to get through as many as possible. If we miss your question or we run out of time, we'll certainly follow up with you. With that, let's hop into today's agenda. So today we're going to talk about the issues and trends. Dom's going to go into some of the details and what we're seeing and just why these are here and how we got into the problem that we have there. Both of us are going to go into the solutions, both the free tools, and Microsoft's done a lot of this work lately, so it's good to see these free tools getting better and better, and where they leave off, and some of the paid tools that we provide here, and what to look for in a paid tool for your situation. We're going to talk about the network. It's always the network until it isn't, but we're going to talk about the issues and particularly some of the issues with COVID-19 and the trends that we've seen in these PST projects and ways to handle that. We'll talk about the user experience, the top issues that we see in these projects, and how to ensure a high user satisfaction project. And then we're going to end with some tips of things you can do today to help start these projects and best practices so that you can get kickstarted, the things that don't cost anything and can get you going right away. Very briefly, in less than 100 seconds here, at Quadratech, we have three main pieces of business. One is our Monterize, or our migration business. We're going to talk about Flight Deck today. We also do things like mailbox migrations into 365, but also legacy archives like Veritas Enterprise Vault and EMC Source 1 into Office 365. We also have a really robust merger acquisition and divestiture product for Office 365, so doing tenant-to-tenant migrations in Cloud Commander. And then we have our Nova platform, which is our management platform for Office 365, which does some really, really good data analytics of usage and security analytics, but there's other aspects of it like delegated administration and policy control. So if any of those are interesting to you, go ahead and hop on our website and we're happy to help you with that. But Dom, let me pass to you and we will give you to hop into some of the issues.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Okay. So can you see my screen?
You're good to go.
Awesome, thank you. So let's talk about first about the issues of PST files. And let's start with what are PST files. So PSTs are often referred to as a personal storage file or personal folders, which is a local repository of email data saved on the client itself. And email data is not only just mail data, it also contains calendar, contacts, and tasks. And depending on the Outlook version, there's also a storage limit per PST file. And there might be good chances that users have multiple of them stored anywhere on their client or network. And the reason, many years back for PST files are to offload email from the server to save storage because storage was very expensive. back in these days, and to reduce the network connectivity and the bandwidth, because that was also an issue, starting with PST files. And a very common problem, I see it almost every day, users are using PST files if their mailbox gets stuck on quota or the quota exceeds. So they will export it to PST files and save it anywhere on their client or wherever on local storage. Where did PSTs come from? PSTs are a 20-plus-year-old technology, and Microsoft introduced PSTs back in 1996. So yeah, when a notebook just had 16 megabytes of RAM and no SSDs. And the common reason to use PSTs are, as I already mentioned, to save Exchange storage, because that was pretty high 20 years ago, and also to save network bandwidth. And yeah, now 14 years later, PST files are still there, and they are no longer needed in new Outlook versions. For example, until Outlook 2013, also IMAP accounts used PST files to fetch the email from the server and save it locally on the client. And yeah, today in 2020, we still have many of PSTs in many large organizations today, because many organizations grew up from Exchange 5.5 or Exchange 2003, and we see a lot of them in every organization. But not to be confused with OST files, which are still here today, and they are used by Outlook clients to synchronize and cache copies of online folders for local use. You may know the Outlook slider. You can choose how many data will be kept offline. That's still here, but has nothing to do with PST files. Why are PSTs a problem? So in these days of regulation and compliance, it seems really unthinkable that PSTs become still so widely used without central management, backup, and control. Anyone can copy, duplicate, move, and create additional PST files. And think about if you do an operating system upgrade, or you have to do a restore or switch hard drives, these files can get corrupted. Another problem is that the default naming convention, if you save a PST file, is outlook.pst. And you can imagine that there are a lot of outlook.pst files, and at the end, no one knows which PST file belongs to which user. We also have e-discovery issues, because not only the naming convention, also different storage, different network storage or client local storages are there, and it's hard to find all the PSTs in your organization. And you cannot enforce retention policies, and legal departments, they are really struggling to ensure they have the right data to defend cases. Yeah, PSTs are definitely not user-friendly, because they are local storage. You can put it into your Outlook, but you don't see these kind of data in OWA or on mobile devices. And also shared PSTs are a problem, because you share everything which is in your mailbox with other people, and they can change, move, and delete files within your PST files. There was also an attack back in 2014. So attackers penetrated and retrieved almost 180 PSTs containing more than 70,000 messages from the mailbox of Sony chairman Amy Pascal, along with other data. So even if you save it on network storages, attackers can get your data, and that's really a security and compliance issue. So, but what can we do to eliminate PST files? So a good thing is that we have the data on a central storage where we can manage them. We can reduce risks, like external attackers can or may have access to PST files if they can break into your network. And also we have operating system costs. Yeah, it should definitely be increased the reach of e-discovery tools and user experience. For example, keep the data on all devices and don't store it on the local client, because also local clients can get lost or be stolen. And all my data can fall under retention policies. So which means I can keep the data for example, 10 years and then automatically delete it and simplify the user experience. And what can we do to follow up all these things? So we have 4 strategies. And the first one is upgrade. So we call it upgrade because we are bringing the data home to exchange online or exchange on-prem, depending on where your users are homed. And you can remove unneeded and duplicated content and also migrate files from leavers that are files from all of those users that have left the company. The second option is move. So this means handle the files floating around on shared drives and use centralized storage. And you can migrate them into a third-party archive system or e-discovery system, either on-prem or into cloud. Yeah, of course, you can do nothing. Allow your users to continue access these files as usual. Maybe the project can be too difficult or funding isn't available. So then, we can't go forward with this step. And of course, another option is to delete all PST files. If you communicate this with your users, you can delete it now, or you can also lock PST files that they can be filled with new content and then delete it in whatever time frame you prefer. So what solutions do we have today on the market to get rid of PST files? Microsoft offers 2, I call it free tools. It's actually not free, but the tool itself is free. You can upload your PST files over the network to a temporary Azure storage location and then use the Office 365 import service to import all the PST data into your mailboxes within your Office 365 tenant. That's free of charge. And you can also use drive shipping. That really means you copy the PST files to, for example, a BitLocker encrypted hard drive, and then physically ship the drive to Microsoft. Microsoft will then upload the data to the temporary Azure storage location, and you can also import the data in the Office 365 admin center to your mailboxes. And drive shipping costs $2 per gigabyte of data. Free tools are good if you have a small organization, only a few PSTs, when you don't have to monitor if any items are corrupt, or if you don't need an advanced monitoring system and reporting system for your PST files. Back to you, Mike. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to talk about some of the paid tools that are on the market and where you may need that. So as Tom mentioned, Microsoft has a few options and that have come out in the last few years to help with this problem, and I certainly recognize that as a challenge. And for organizations that are smaller, that can be a good fit or maybe a very simple situation. When we talk about needing a more robust solution, these are kind of the scenarios that we see in the market. You don't know where the PSTs are or who they belong to. So if you didn't have policies that force PSTs to be in a certain location, which is pretty rare, they can be anywhere. They can be on network drives and workstations and removable media and all these different places. And that can make using some of the free tools very difficult. You may need help in planning your projects. As Don mentioned in one of the 4 options, one of the challenges where a lot of organizations kind of look at doing one of these projects and then it falls by the wayside is it is difficult. So sometimes having someone come in and do a full assessment that's done this a lot can be very, very helpful. I already mentioned more than 500 users. That really comes down to some of the help desk impacts that users run into and some of the manual work that the free tools tend to have, and they just don't scale, or you can't bring in, an intern or somebody to help you do this project, which some organizations have done. Once you hit the scale, it really becomes very difficult. You have bandwidth issues, and bandwidth issues we're going to talk about in the network section pretty aggressively, particularly because of the change in where everybody's working today and some new problems that we have in doing that. You could have a lot of PSTs with corruption and passwords. So, when you have a small amount of users and small amount of PSTs, you can manually run the prefix tools, and you can break passwords or get the passwords from the users. But when you have a lot of them, it really is difficult to manage that and not hold a project up. It's a lot of time for an administrator. You may want to filter or have advanced options. There's some very basic filters in those free tools, but you may need something more advanced, or you want to do things like redirect some of the data to the archive mailbox, some to the primary based on a date range or based on if the PST was connected or whatever you may want. And the other aspect is a deadline. Some of the paid tools, I know I'm biased and being Quadratech and having a good solution here, but some of the paid tools really are good about making this run very, very efficient. So if you're someone that's on a deadline to get the project done, it certainly can be a lot easier to have one of the more robust tools do it. Regardless of whatever tool you do, and actually whether it's a free tool, our tool, another competitor's tool, these are really the 5 stages that you need to go through for a PST project. The first is the discovery phase, where you need to go out and find where they all live, find out where they all are, so you know how big your problem is. Even if you doing a very basic SCCM report can get a good idea of how big your problem is. You might not know who they belong to in some of the advanced scanning that software provides, but you can get an idea of what is there. You then need to centralize it. And this can be done by bringing it to a centralized server or bringing it to some sort of storage so that you can bring it into the service. And the free tool, certainly that's how you need to bring it into an Azure location or a drive ship option, as Dom mentioned. You then need to do cleanup and preparation. So you need to, if it's one of the free tools, give it the list of who they belong to and give it a mapping file and kind of give it a packing list. If you're using one of the other tools, you're going to process these files and do everything we talked about. Do the password removals, take care of corruption, do filtering, really get them ready for migration, however advanced that needs to be for your situation. And then you have migration, which is actually the simplest piece, but you've got to be careful that that handles bandwidth disconnects, which you run into in the centralization phase, and really ensuring that you're being very, very efficient in getting this into Office 365 so that the user gets access to this data as quickly as possible. And then very importantly is cleanup. You've done all this work, all this analysis, all this time. You need to go back and ensure that that is taken care of. So that is important, that the cleanup is actually taken care of, the Outlook profile is cleaned up, and the files are gone so that you can move on to another project. When we talk about the challenges, one of the biggest challenges here is, and Dom alluded to this in the beginning, users are very, very tight with this data. Many people and organizations that rely on this, we've been using these since the late 90s. This is a part of our being. This is a part of how we work. This is a very key part to our users' lives, especially for our knowledge worker community, where we don't really work in a system. We work in the Office suite, and our email is just a very key part of that. So when you do a PST migration, most solutions, you have to take that file away from the user for a period of time and move it. No matter how many times you communicate that, until they log in and see that error message that the file is gone, that immediately creates a help desk call, which is very, very difficult. So you need to ensure that you pick a solution where that isn't the case when you have a larger piece. But that's a really big problem, is that emotional connection that people have to this data. Removing passwords, we say about 8 to 17%, which I know is a wide variety, but it really depends on your country, region, and use case, are password protected PSTs. It's really important to remember that PST passwords are not encryption. PST files are password protected because they think they're password protected, and if you tell the file it's no longer password protected, you can open it right up using any utility. So, but it can be a blocker because that step has to occur as part of the migration to clean that up. Multiple copies of the same PST file, people making backups of them. They may have gotten stuck one day and had corruption in PST, so every month they're backing it up somewhere. They put it on the network share, they put it on a SharePoint site, they put it on their OneDrive, they put it on a CD somewhere, and now you don't know which is a real copy and which is up to date. So it's important to have that analysis done and identify it. Who really owns the PST file is very important, and that can be done through some basic analysis, and you get basic results, or you may, particularly in more complex environments, may need to use a service that will actually scan and look for that ownership. Repairing corruption. Corruption for PST files has always been a problem, but as time goes on, these files get bigger, they're more susceptible to corruption. The newer the version of Outlook, the more communication that we're actually seeing to these PST files. That's increasing the corruption rate. The other aspect is if they're being opened over the network connection, which technically is not supported, that increases corruption. And then when you add in our current working environment where we may be using overburdened VPN connections and other situations, we're seeing a higher and higher and higher corruption rate. So dealing with that aspect can be a very large problem. We want to ensure that shared PSTs are found, and shared PSTs are a thing, and it's amazing when you run into it because only one user can be in at a time, and really they're susceptible to corruption. But finding this use case is very, very important. The other aspect is ensuring that you're putting the user into a lock policy at the correct time. So a user has to get these registry keys to prevent PSTs right at the correct time. So they're working the day before and using it in the right destination the next day. And probably the most important user satisfaction aspect is the Outlook profile cleanup. If a user has 10 PST files, whenever the error sequence, which a lot of times is when you get a new calendar invite, comes in, the Outlook client's going to look for that PST file. If there are 10 PST files connected, the user is going to get 10 error messages that it can't connect to the file because you just took the file away from it. So really ensuring that that's taken care of, because a lot of people forget how to add or remove those files. And we've had complaints from people that claim there's a 90% plus help desk call volume when you just take files away from people. So there can be a lot of hidden expenses in these as well. Dom at the beginning mentioned kind of the 4 things that you can do with PST files. These are the matrix to help you kind of guide you on what you do. So we've got upgrade, move, do nothing, or delete. From a legal discovery standpoint, delete is hard to color code there because you're deleting the problem of taking on a lot of risk, depending on your legal policy and things that you have. But you can see the do nothing approach, certainly from a cost perspective, can be the best payoff on it, but there's still all these issues that you have to deal with as part of it. And obviously upgrading and bringing it forward gives you the best, but there is some project cost to doing that. So it's a risk versus reward for most organizations. The deletion aspect, there are two methods of that. One is you just delete them all, and some organizations have done this, and few are successful, but many have tried it. And others put a lock on the files where you can't write to them anymore, and then kind of age them out. And then really 5 years later, you see them actually deleting the files. So there's some certain options to handle there. I'm going to go into the network and particularly some of the aspects related to the network impacts with the coronavirus. This is a good time if you have questions to go ahead and put them in the chat as we go here. So what we have to remember with the network is because we have remote work was always challenging for PST projects, but with the plans that not, some companies are 100% work at home till the end of the year or beyond, we're in a very new cycle where we have a lot of data on these endpoints and we don't have a lot of options on how to get it back. The other challenge with this is users may have had PSTs on desktops. They're not really mobile, so those PSTs are stuck in an office somewhere and they can't get to them. So migrating them is a new challenge. We as a company have seen a lot more items pushing into Azure. So we support Azure as one of our migration options, and then a split tunnel so that a lot of organizations have split tunneling into Office 365 so that local traffic from your home goes directly to the service instead of having to go through a data center. A lot of organizations are doing that for their PST projects where they're allowing a configuration where those files can be securely uploaded off the VPN to avoid causing any issues. When we talk about Outlook caches, it's important to remember that if you're putting these files back in the mailbox, the primary mailbox, and that data is within the user's cache policy, so the slider that again Dom mentioned one of his references, then the data will come right back down, and that can have network impacts as well. And if you're a company that's really struggling with VPN capacity right now, it's really important to be aware of the network topology in that. When you're talking about a global project, you need a global solution. So that's where putting processing nodes wherever they need to be. If you have users directly uploading PSTs from around the world into their Office 365 instance, particularly when it's in a different region, it's going to be a very slow project. And there's going to be a lot of disconnects and challenges with that. And that's, again, where you really need a software solution to help do that collection and migration. You can, if you're using a third-party tool, put these processing servers close to the users, and you can use different options to do that, whether it's Azure, a local office, data center, or even drive shipping, as was talked about in another solution. This will allow the project to move as fast as possible because one of the largest challenges is getting PST files off of the workstations and to this processing point for remediation. So if that is efficient, then when the user logs off for the day, doesn't have good network connection, or goes to sleep, that server is processing the files and pushing them into 365 and doing so in an efficient manner so that the end user isn't having to worry about it. At the end of the day, if you have a significant PST project, the network team needs a seat at the table because you're going to need to make a proper plan to handle these capacity challenges. So let's talk about the user experience. We talked about all the errors that can happen in Outlook when a user doesn't get the files removed from their Outlook profile. And what we're getting at on a lot of these is you need a agent to control the end user experience. And this does a lot more than just controlling Outlook, but it really ensures that the user is taken care of, they're getting proper notifications and communication, and it is allowing also to handle network disconnects and issues like that. This can really reduce help desk volume, and help desk volume is one of the most expensive aspects of a PST project, so that's quite important. A proper agent, if you're using a checklist if you're looking for a solution, this is what a proper agent will do. It'll report on if the file's open and in use, so that you know that that's a really good indicator that that file's in use by that person. So we talk about ownership, that's probably a good indicator. We want to ensure that PSTs can be open while they're being migrated so that if it's a 50 gig file, the user is able to access that data while it's being migrated. You need to be able to control the registry keys so that you can implement them at just the right time. If you're a global company and your users speak multiple languages, it needs to ensure that it can handle multi-language communication. These are difficult topics, and it's always best that it is the prompts are presented in the user's local language. It needs to be able to handle network disconnects and kick off right where it left off, not just restart the file again. And it needs to clean up the Outlook profile. You also need to ensure that it supports desktops, VDI, app streaming. I realize I don't have Apple computers on here, but ensuring that all of the builds that you have, that there's a plan on how to address this so that you can have a good user experience and in this project of upgrading the PST files. And here are just some tips for successful projects. We talked about discovery being very important. It's essential. You have to know where they're located. You have to know who they belong to, and you have to understand the shared PSTs and terminated user PSTs. This will drive the entire planning and execution process, and it's really important that that's done completely so that you ensure you know what you're looking for, but you're not going to oversubscribe. You're not going to enable too many users at once, and everybody can have a good experience. You're also going to want to find your project cadence. You're going to start slow and keep adding and adding and adding and adding. This is, we've got some record projects of 5 terabytes a day in doing these projects. That didn't happen for right away. That took a couple months in some cases for these really large projects of just adding and adding and adding to reach that capacity and reach that project cadence. And you want to ensure you're never pushing it too hard and you're getting enough feedback that things are working correctly for you. You want to invest time in communications. I think one of the best communication projects I've seen is when the CIO was sitting there in a video message expressing why they were upgrading the PSTs, express why they needed buy-in and people to follow the instructions. And that really set the tone for the project and allowed for a successful project. So ensuring that the communications are clear, everyone knows what's going on, and that they're at a good level for our end user community on a difficult project. In all the communications, focus on the end state. This is not a PST elimination project, this is an upgrade. And I know that sounds minor, but when we talk about the emotional connection that people have to this data and how core that is to their working lives, you just want to upgrade them to the next big thing. And people understand that. And our understanding of a system upgrade, because we've all been through a lot, if you start it with the PST elimination project, you're going to immediately have people worried about their data and worried that not everything's going to come over. So it's really important that that is shown that this is an upgrade in what you're trying to do. All right. So Dom, let's talk about what we can do today. I know you and I kind of run into this. I always like when we can end a webinar with something that you can do. Do you want to talk about some of these, or how do we want to handle these?
Yes, so I can start definitely. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you should turn off PSTs, but independent if you are planning the migration project or not. So even if you are not using PSTs today, or maybe you aren't aware that anyone is using that in your organization, you should prevent your users for creating PST files and adding more and more, yeah, like shadow IT stuff to it. That's a really important point, independently if you plan to migrate or not.
And I think too, Dom, it makes sense, regardless of where you are in this journey, you want to turn them off for people that are joining your organization before they even have the opportunity. You can do a GPO policy that's scoped to an AD group, and then your provisioning process can include that AD group, and then you just reuse it for the project as well.
Absolutely.
I think turning them off for people that don't have them is a good second step, so that they don't have that opportunity. Particularly if you're on Office 365, that storage problem isn't really a problem. But if they kind of look over their shoulder and see other colleagues doing it, they may, new staff or newer staff or staff that don't have them may start this practice. And we really want to keep the data nice and safe in the system so we don't have a data exposure or make this project even more complex. I think SCCM reports can help with this and looking at users' network shares, but you got to be careful because if they're hiding files on business shares that you can't necessarily see assigned to a user, you may miss them. So if you're going to do this, you definitely want to turn it on in groups so you don't accidentally create you don't turn it on for 40,000 users all at once and find that, you got a help desk volume that can't be handled. And then the other aspect to help is to look at finding funding for these projects. For those on the phone that are on the webinar, I shouldn't say through the phone. I guess that makes me sound old. When we talk about looking at doing this, you can, as an Exchange administrator, drive this project alone. All of us that are in the Exchange space and IT really do not like these files, but you really need buy-in from more than that to get a project like this done. And it's legal driven is always a good way. And a lot of times you'll find that team's really struggling with e-discovery, or they may have had a court case where they didn't have all their data. Your infrastructure team, which is usually where Exchange comes in, but looking at other avoidance. So maybe you're going to have to upgrade a SAN to larger capacity, but you could remove the 15% that's being taken up by PSTs, things like that to help find that funding, and also with compliance and IT security to help drive this project. All right, we got a couple questions that have come in here. While we wait, this is the lovely ebook that Dom has authored, and it's available to you on our website here. It will be included in the post-webinar activities, but certainly if you are undertaking a PST project, this is an amazing guide to talk you through some of the tools that were talked about today and a lot more advice that Dom shared today. But with that, let me start with a few questions. Okay, so we have a question on why can't I just use the file owner of the PST file to determine who it belongs to? Dom, do you want to take that or do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, please take you it, Mike.
Okay. So the NT file owner of a PST is, I think that's what we're referring to here, is when it is a lot of times administrator or the backup administrator. It's whatever touched that file at some point in an upgrade, and it certainly can be an indicator. So at Quadratech, we score the files, and it's a point system, so that certainly is one of the points, but it tends to not be accurate. Also for terminated users and shared PST files, it's not accurate. So it can be used as an indicator, but it shouldn't be used as the big piece there. We've got another question here. How do you handle duplicate PST files without getting them into the mailbox?
Yeah, it depends on if you are using free tools or paid tools. So duplicate PST files. In both cases, you have to define a mapping table that the PST file contains to which user, and it's always related to the identity. And you really have to be sure that you move the right data to the right person, back to the mailbox or to the archive.
And where a paid tool can help take that to the next level is that process is automated. And I know our tooling looks for backup copies and identical names, and will flag that. And then you can decide if you only want to take the most recent copy or ignore likely duplicate PST files and things like that. How do you identify the PST ownership? So Dom, I think you mentioned, we talked about in the first question too, answered that a little bit, where you can use certain indicators like where the file lives in some cases to determine it, and with the free tools, you have to identify the ownership yourself. So I think it's looking at reports, looking at SCCM reports, and yourself trying to do it. We use in our paid tool, we use a scoring algorithm to look at open up the file, look at let's see if I can name them all: the most common sender, the most common receiver, if it's open in Outlook, the NT file owner, is it on the user's home share, and there's two more. For some reason I can't remember all seven off the top of my head here, but it's really, that's how we do it, is we score it, and then at the end we define it's almost like the spam algorithms. And if it reaches a certain threshold, it's assigned. If it doesn't, then it goes into a failure queue for action. Okay. So we have a question around, I'm just trying to be sure I get it correct here. There's a situation where an individual user is downloading a PST to a USB drive and using it as a backup, and it's part of the user's procedure. Is it only, is this an option to help with the for remote offices, is this a challenge? Is this something that has issues and limitations? So I think what we're getting at here is, can, for remote offices, because backup, that's something actually that we haven't talked a ton in this one. Backing up these files is very, very difficult, and maintaining it. So I think our question here is, what's really the risk of having users do this?
Yeah, don't use removable storage for backups. And yeah, it's actually not a really backup because their PST files are not encrypted or they can be lost. The drive could be stolen, and you don't have it. You can put any retention policies on it if you are having it in Exchange Online, for example, and you don't can users can search. It's not on mobile devices. The user experience is also very poor. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think the data security aspect is the first aspect. Also, to when you're keeping it all in a closed system, you automatically get a lot of compliance with it, so you don't have a terminated employee or any of those bad actor issues of the USB stick going missing. But also, I can't stress enough what Dom said, and what we said a few times. PST passwords are not encryption. So if you have a file that is lost and that USB key goes lost, even if you're, well, if it's encrypted, then you got to ensure you knew it was encrypted. But the files that get lost, even if they're password protected, need to be considered as exposed, and you need to follow your data breach procedures. Okay. Oh, this is interesting. It's slightly off topic, but I think we can go into it because Dom, you and I have debates on tenant to tenant migration. So it's the last question, so I'll take it. If you want to do an Office 365 tenant to tenant migration without a third-party tool, is a PSD export import the only way?
It is. Yeah. For now, PSD export import is the only way. Microsoft doesn't offer any kind of tenant to tenant migration. It's in a private preview and they are working on it, at least for mailbox migrations, but you also have to take care of a lot of other things like your mailbox permissions, rules. The identity must be prepared in the other tenant. And also you can span a single domain, SMTP domain, into two tenants. Yeah, the only way right now is really PSD export import.
Yep, and that preview program, I think they said it was a public program, but I know people are struggling to get into it because we've for smaller projects, it's been an option instead of using a third-party tool. And if you need a third-party tool, you can find one with us, but I won't be. But we can go into that another day.
Yeah, but Mailbox is or email is a service of a lot of other services, and especially during the home office, Teams became bigger and bigger. And yeah, you should not focus on email migration for tenant to tenant. There are a lot of other stuff to migrate as well, like Teams, SharePoint, and
OneDrive,
OneDrive
SharePoint,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's funny, we always say Exchange and Office 365, we always connect together, which, it's the biggest service, but there's so much more behind that suite. That when you suddenly have to move it is a problem. All right, that is all the questions that we have. Um, I appreciate everyone joining today. The recording of this will be available in the next couple days. We'll include the resources. And Dom, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you sharing your advice with our listeners.
Of course, I appreciate it as well. And thank you very much, Mike.
Enjoy your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.